Well, it's been quite a while since I last had a video out. During the time, I have been working on this vanilla V20-9 computer, which, as you might remember, turned out to be a Tulip Computers Compact 2. The motherboard had loads of battery damage on it, loads of corrosion. I've since cleaned all that up, replaced all of the logic on this board. I did find several faulty chips. Replaced nearly all of the passives, and it doesn't work. It has absolutely kicked my ass. No joke, I spent easily 2 weeks working on this. Can't get it working, and to be honest with you, the reason that there hasn't been a video out for 5 weeks now, well, I was just a bit burnt out after spending so much time on this and not getting it repaired. Unfortunately, I think the fault does lie with one of these main components here, possibly the Faraday chip, but more likely the PAL, because there is a clock missing on one of the logic chips up here, and that clock, tracing it back, is generated via this PAL. The pin in particular that should be coming out with is just held low. There's no activity on it whatsoever. So unfortunately, despite my best efforts, the board is dead. But we do have that nice case. We've got the floppy drive, which I've since tested thoroughly and it works fine. The monitor's good, as is the display adapter and our MFM hard drive. There's nothing wrong with that. So what I'm going to do is use our little 386 motherboard. This came in the big lot of parts that I bought off eBay earlier in the year. This does fit fine within the case, so we'll install this, although we might have to get a little creative to fit a standard AT power supply. The power supply out of the vanilla, yes, it does work, but it's missing the -5 volts, which I think we need for this. So hopefully not all is lost and we can create a little system out of this. I do have some of the original documentation and discs for the vanilla V20, including the original version of DOS 4.0 on 5¼ inch discs. So I think we will go ahead and install that, just in an attempt to try and keep the machine as original as possible, despite the fact it's going from an NEC V20 at 9 MHz to a 386SX at 16 MHz, I think this board is. Yeah, it's a bit disappointing, but let's try and make the best of a bad situation. But before we do that, just want to show you quickly what I have done to this board to at least try and fix it. So as you'll see, everything is in sockets, and I had to do that to clean up all the corrosion. All the nastiness is now gone, and where the solder mask was exposed, I have covered it with green nail polish. Not the neatest job I've ever done, but it would have worked fine. Yes, there are a couple of bits that still need touched up, but that's besides the point because this doesn't work. So if I just power the board up, you can see that all the LEDs on our test card are now lit. So the top row is just the voltages, the bottom row is reset, frame, IRD and clock. And we can even use our logic probe to confirm that we do have a clock present where it's meant to be on the processor and various other places about the board. But if we take a look at the data bus, which I can probe down here, for example, you can see it's just stuck high. No activity whatsoever. But if I power cycle with that on that pin, you can see there is activity for a split second and then the system crashes. What I'm putting that down to is, as I said, either this Faraday chip or this PAL. We are missing a clock up here on this 74LS174, which is a flip-flop. That's the clock there. There's another one of those chips at that point. You can see it's got its clock on that pin. This one doesn't, and that is generated from down here on this PAL. So I think that's the problem. It's the only signal as such that I can find that is missing. What is driving the PAL to generate that clock though? I don't know, as I don't have a pinout for this. I suspect it is coming from this Faraday, but whether it's the Faraday or the PAL that's bad, we'll never know. Most of these components here I can get replacements for on eBay easily enough. The Faraday chip though, it seems to be impossible to come by. And the PAL, well, unless I have the code for it, we're never going to replace that. I'm not going to bin this board though. I will hold on to it. On the off chance one day I find another, or maybe if someone watching this has one of these boards and fancies lending it to me for a while, just so I could try and swap out these components, it would at least let me know for sure where the problem lies. But anyway, for now it's dead. Let's just get it out of the way. I think what we'll do is hook up our 386 board here on the bench with our MFM drive and our display adapter, set everything up, and then we can have a think about trying to mount this within the case. One thing that's missing from our 386 board is a battery. If you remember back to when I first got this, there was an old barrel battery on here that had leaked some. We tidied that up, actually socketed these two chips here to remove that battery damage, and I just never bothered fitting another battery. But we are going to need one now with this board going into a machine. So what I'm going to do, rather than fit another barrel battery, is use one of these. So we can use a lithium battery in here instead. Now that battery will not be rechargeable, and this board will be trying to charge using 5 volts out of the positive side. So what we also need to do is fit a little diode to stop that charging. Just like that. So if I power up the board and take a look, before the diode then, we're getting 4.76 volts. Which, if I had it connected straight up to our new lithium battery, well, that's non-rechargeable, so eventually it would have exploded. After the diode though, 0.06, that'll be okay. That means we can fit our new non-rechargeable battery in there, and that will maintain our BIOS settings. So let's hook up our Hercules graphics adapter, which I'm going to stick in the end. That's the same position it was in the original motherboard. Our MFM disk controller, I'm going to be using this again. But the one other thing we need is a floppy controller, because there's none built onto this motherboard. And the only card I have with floppy controller on it actually is this Super I/O card. This also has IDE on it, although I have that disabled because, as I say, we're using the MFM drive. But this will give us parallel and serial as well. So, I'm going to put that in there. I just then need to run a few wires. Let's not forget our battery, which goes in like that. Okay, everything's hooked up and ready to go. We're also going to use the keyboard that came with the system. Really nice to type on. Mechanical switches. Dare I say, could this be a clone of the IBM Model M? I've never actually used one of those, but the switches on this, they're nice and clicky, but they have a really nice feel to them. Very good keyboard. Anyway, let's power up. So if we just jump into the BIOS, we need to set a few things. Start with the date. This is June the 24th. And it is 2021. Y2K compliant motherboard. And the time is currently 6:12. Right, we're not going to select a hard drive type. Because this is an MFM drive, we need to set that up separately. In the last video, I was trying to set it here. I'm wondering why it wasn't working. That's because that's not where you do it. Floppy drive, 1.2 megabyte, 5.25. And we're just going to jump into the advanced setting as well, because I'm going to change the boot sequence to AC. And let's turn on the floppy drive seek at boot. Okay, write to CMOS and exit. We're going to be using the original DOS discs that came with the system, MS-DOS version 4. Let's put in disk number 1. And let's go. Hopefully this boots. Yep, where it goes. Right, we're not going to install DOS just yet because we need to set up the MFM drive. So we're just going to press escape. And what we need is the debug command. Thing is, I'm not sure what disk that is on. It's not on that one. Not on that one. Maybe disk 3. Yep, there it is. In fact, let me move you closer to the screen so you can see this better. So in debug here, what we want to do is type G equals C800:5. And that takes us into the utility that's built into the BIOS on the MFM hard drive. So it's drive number 1. For interleave, I'm not 100% sure what to pick here. So range is 2 to 4. I'm going to pick one in the middle, 4. And then we got a drive table. Now our Rodyne drive doesn't appear here, so we're just going to go for 15, free format. And if I just pull up the characteristics of our hard drive, it is 872 cylinders. We have 7 heads. Step rate, I'm going to pick 5. Reduced write current. Again, not 100% sure what to enter here. So I'm just going to go for 872, which is the same as the total number of cylinders. Write pre-comp is 650. And we're not going to bother splitting this into 2 logical units. It's only 50 megabytes. Is all the above correct? Yes. Ready to erase disk. There's no defects noted on the hard drive itself, so hopefully it's all good. Proceed with the format. Well, that took its sweet time, but it's finished. Need to put disk number 1 in again. And press any key to reboot. I don't see the any key. Let's just press space. Okay, it's looking for the select disk, which is disk number 2. And now it wants the install disk again. Nothing like a bit of good old-fashioned disk swapping. Let's just go for a full installation. And UK keyboard layout. Install to drive C, yep. No printers. Let's install the shell and good to go. But it wants to make a copy of the installation disk. Of course it does. Now the only blank 5¼ inch discs I have are double density. So I hope this works. I'm not actually sure if these are double density or high density. How do you tell on a 5¼ inch disc? Just by looking at it. Sounds like we've got an error, defect disk. Well, that turned into a bit of a project. I could not get this drive to write onto my blank discs at all, no matter what I did. It would try to format the discs. The reason the cover's off, because I wanted to see what was happening. And it was almost as if it was stepping through 2 tracks at a time. When I got to 50% trying to format a disc, the heads were just knocking off the end of the rail here, just against this section. And it transpires the way to fix that was to go into the BIOS and change it from a 1.2 megabyte drive to a 360K drive. Now, this is an NEC FD1057, and if you Google that, it does tell you that it's a 1.2 megabyte drive, but maybe it's not. Maybe it is just 360K. But regardless, we've got it sorted, the installation has continued, and it's now formatting our hard drive. And there we are, MS-DOS 4.01 installed with DOS shell. We do have some other software to install, software that came with the vanilla. But I think the first thing we should do is try and put all of this in the case. That'll just tidy up the desk and give us a bit more space. So I've been having to think about how we're going to fit all this in here. The motherboard fits in fine and on the existing mounting points that we have here. Luckily enough, the original vanilla motherboard was laid out to the AT standard. So I can screw that in there just like that. And I found an extra couple of matching memory modules, so thought may as well just stick them in there, give us 4 megabytes total rather than the 2 we had originally. But those and the power connector here do present a bit of a problem, because if you remember, this was in here. This carried the power supply down here, then the hard drive sat on top of it, and then the floppy drive was mounted in here at the front. And while that does sort of sit in there, it is rocking a bit because it's resting on top of the memory modules here, which is no good. But it's also going to completely block access to the power connector at this point. We do need to keep this though, because, well, it's where the floppy drive is going to mount. So I could just cut this in half, but I'd rather not do that. I'd rather try and keep this. These bits here unscrew. So I think all we need to do really is try to recreate the front half of this on the 3D printer. And that's what I've done here, or at least tried to do. And I've just made it the full depth required to fill this void. So that's going to sit in there like that. Then we just need to try and mount these things to it. how am I going to do this? You see, these things here also hold the front cover in place, which sits in there and then that mounts like that. If I just put the floppy drive between these, that should hold them in roughly the correct location as well. Then I'll just take a pen and mark where the screws need to go through it. Right, so with 4 marks here, what I want to do is just drill a small hole in there, and then we can try and put the screws down through it. Okay, holes are drilled. Let's see if this is going to work. I am just going to try and use these original screws. Now, screwing these into plastic, they're going to strip very quickly, but you know, it just has to hold it, and then gravity can do the rest. It doesn't have to be particularly strong, or at least that's my hope anyway. The screws are going in there quite tight. I've drilled the hole just slightly smaller than them, so hopefully this works. Yeah, that's pretty good. And once the floppy drive's in there holding it together, it'll hopefully just make it even stronger. I've also stuck this down just with a bit of double-sided sticky tape so it can't move, and double checked all my measurements here before committing. The top layer on the 3D print here, in fact all the walls have been made solid 2mm, which is quite a bit thicker than you normally would use, but I just went with that to try and give this a bit of rigidity. That's pretty strong. I'm pleased with that. Now, previously the power supply sat here, and then the hard drive sat on top of it. I really don't know where we're going to put this. It's maybe going to have, it's maybe going to have to sit away over here, and I'll have to run some wires. But as for the hard drive, what I thought we'd do is just remove these brackets, and then we can just mount it in here below the floppy drive. There's a blank cover for this bottom 5¼ inch bay, and I do have somewhere some adapters to mount a 3.5 inch drive in a 5¼ inch bay, or if I can't find them I can always print some more. So let's do that. Floppy drive and hard drive are installed, and the front of the case is certainly starting to come together. I'm still a little undecided as to what to do with this power supply. I am half tempted, just to leave it lying outside the case and run all the wires through that hole there. I think they would be long enough to get to where they need to go, and I could print an enclosure for this. But I also think there should just be enough room to put this in here, or possibly even over here, although if it's there I don't know if the wires will stretch. I think what I should maybe do is get the other expansion cards in, the display adapter, the MFM controller and the other one, run all the rest of the wires that I need to, and that'll give us a better idea of how much space we have left. Yeah, there's not a lot of room, sure there's not. I suppose that just about fits there. Certainly fits there a bit better. So if I built a bracket, try and hold that like that. This power switch can certainly run to the back and we can come up with something to hold it in that hole there. And then we'd need to disconnect that and run a set of wires across and also mount that at that point. I just think this area here is too tight. Plus, if the power supply was mounted there, it's going to block our access to the RAM and whatnot if we ever needed to change anything. Right, that's what we'll do. I will try and come up with some sort of bracket arrangement to hold that there. So I've come up with this plate here. This is covering the hole from where the old power supply used to sit. Our mains can go in there, and that is going to be our switch. Those parts are just recovered from the old power supply, which I am definitely going to install here. There's the wires waiting for it. But I had a thought. Rather than putting it in here in its original case, which was quite bulky, how about we strip the board out of that case? So it's just this now, and mount that on this. So the idea being, that was sitting there like that. I'll secure it to the bottom of the case here with some double-sided sticky tape. And then this thing will go in there like that. We're going to keep the fan just to get a bit of air moving. And that fan is going to be mounted on there to blow air in to the power supply. But we've also got the exhaust fan on the case. This was connected to the old power supply originally. I've just cut the wires of that and connected them off to one of the Molex connectors on the 12 volt. So that'll just be general exhaust from the case. Hopefully this is going to work. I know that is quite exposed in there, but it should be fine. Let's get everything hooked up and we can test it. Everything's hooked up and ready to go. Monitor's connected. Let's test it. Hopefully nothing explodes. All seems good. That ticking sound is just the memory counting up. So we know the speaker's working. And we have a power LED. Don't know if you'll be able to see that on the camera or not. Hopefully the system still boots. Yep. Brilliant. There we are. All that's left to do is put the lid on. The vanilla V20-9. I think it looks pretty good. And yeah, it's not really a V20-9 anymore, is it? It's a 386SX 16 MHz with 387 code processor and 4 MB of RAM. But at least it is in the style of the original machine. It's using its original MFM hard drive and controller. It's got the original display adapter in there driving, the original monitor, and it's even running its original copy of MS-DOS 4.01. Now, there were a few other things that came with the system, but this video is getting long enough as it is, so we'll maybe leave them for next time. But one thing in particular that I thought was pretty interesting, it came with another operating system, a copy of GEM. Now, I've never used this, I don't know anything about it. Does it just get installed over the top of DOS? Or is it a complete replacement for DOS? If it is a complete replacement, can we dual boot between DOS and GEM? I'll have to do a bit of homework on this, and hopefully these discs are still good, because I would like to install it and try it. There was also a copy of TimeWorks Publisher for PC. Not sure if this is software for DOS or for GEM, but it was included anyway, so I would like to install it again just to see what it's all about. And there was also a mouse, complete in box, one Logitech Pilot mouse, 3-button serial. Has its driver discs in there, and I dare say you'll need that for the likes of GM. But as I say, that's it for now. So thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, I would appreciate a thumbs up. Why not hit subscribe if you haven't done so already. Still plenty more yet to come here on CRG, and I promise you it will not be 5 weeks until the next video's out. But I'll see you next time.